Okay, recording started. Okay, let's pay homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, yeah, so bear with me a little bit because my laptop is in slow motion mode today. So before we start with today's reading, where we're continuing on the chapter of Venerable Ānanda, I thought I'd just quickly summarize a little bit the recent book readings we did before entering into today's. So we read through how Venerable Ānanda supported women practitioners during the time of the Buddha. So he played a key role in ensuring that the Bhikkhuni Sangha was set up. Yeah. As we read, Mahapajapati Gotami, the Buddha's nurse mother, literally asked the Buddha, if she and a number of the Buddhist women during that time could be ordained as nuns. And we read how the Buddha wasn't very keen about that for various reasons. Not that he didn't want to set it up, but he also didn't want to give the impression that it was that it should be taken lightly. And so after Venerable Ānanda had really put in special requests and talked to the Buddha specifically, then the Buddha laid down specific rules for the setting up of the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So the Buddha, as we read, agreed, but set 8 special conditions for the nuns. And also, after the Bhikkhuni Sangha was set up, then Venerable Ānanda also played a role in guiding them and teaching them the Dhamma. All right. Then after that, we read about Venerable Ānanda's relationship with other fellow monks. Yeah. And he was closest with Venerable Sariputta, who was nicknamed, so Venerable Sariputta was nicknamed the Marshal of the Dhamma, and Venerable Ānanda was nicknamed the Guardian of the Dhamma. Why Guardian of the Dhamma? So as we read, Venerable Ānanda had this amazing ability to recall all the suttas that the Buddha had given. And so even in certain occasions where Venerable Ānanda was not with the Buddha when the Buddha delivered a sermon, Venerable Ānanda would request that upon return, when the Buddha returned back to the monastery, Venerable Ānanda requested that the Buddha repeated the sermon to Venerable Ānanda so that he had this whole body of the Sutta Pitaka literally in his memory. And that's why when we read the suttas, a lot of times you see in the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya especially, the first sentence we see is, "Thus have I heard." So this is quoted by Venerable Ānanda. Venerable Ānanda is saying, "Thus have I heard on this occasion, the Blessed One, the Buddha was blah, 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 blah." Yeah. And that's the reason why. So when Venerable Sariputta passed away, Venerable Ānanda was really, really affected. But the Buddha consoled him. So we must understand also that Venerable Ānanda actually had not attained enlightenment. It was only after the Buddha's passing away, just before the first Buddhist council. Okay, so naturally, when someone he's close to, like Venerable Sariputta, passes away, he would be very, very upset. Yeah. Then we also read how Venerable Ānanda played an important role in guiding other monks as well in their practice, like the Venerable Vangisa, who had strong inclinations towards intense sensual desires. So Venerable Ānanda helped him a little bit. And then also Channa. And Venerable Ānanda also helped Channa a little bit. So we could see Venerable Ānanda's personality was of very kind, compassionate, soft nature when he, as a fellow monk and also as a teacher to others in the Sangha. And he was very popular. He was well liked. It was difficult to find anyone that wasn't had something to complain about Venerable Ānanda. Venerable Ānanda was, in that sense, he had a very personable character. Yeah. So that's what we read the last time. So now we are going to read today Venerable Ānanda's conversations with the Buddha. Okay. So if one also considers as conversations the silent inner rapport with a Dhamma discourse, then the whole Sutta Pitaka actually consists of Venerable Ānanda's conversations with the Buddha. It's interesting to, see the whole Sutta Pitaka as a different perspective, in the sense that we can see the whole Sutta Pitaka, or almost the whole of the Sutta Pitaka, or a large majority of it, is like a narrative story from the perspective of Venerable Ānanda, is what I'm trying to say. You can see it that way. It's almost like we are reading narrative stories. Well, in this case, not really stories, they're more like teachings. But in a lot of the suttas, if we want to dig deeper, the early part of the sutta, and a lot of the Majjhima Nikaya, quite a number of it, let's say the first half of it, or the first 30% of it, talks about a background of, somebody, could be Ganaka Moggallana or another monk or something like that, which sets the setting of the actual sermon that the Buddha gave. So we can think of it as like a narrative, yeah? So Venerable Ānanda was almost always present when the Buddha gave a discourse. And those few talks that the Blessed One gave when Venerable Ānanda was absent, he repeated for him afterwards. The Buddha often addressed the Venerable Ānanda with questions on the teachings, which were either meant for Ānanda's spiritual growth, or gave the occasion for a discourse to all the monks present. It is always more stimulating for the listeners when two experts discuss a subject with each other, rather than when only one speaks. So it's in a sense, we can think of this sentence commentary, let's say, why it's more stimulating. So if you think about modern day, when we witness something, a speech, let's say by anyone. It doesn't have to be a Dhamma talk. It can be just a speech or a talk in general. And then we compare that with a panel discussion. So panel discussion is usually either two people and a facilitator, or even a debate. Debate's actually more interesting, more stimulating, because it's usually two opposing parties trying to defend what they strongly believe in, or defend something that they're trying to present. So usually from a listener's perspective, it's more stimulating to listen to either a debate or a panel discussion, that means more than one person, than it is when it's only a talk. Yeah, in some occasions, if the speaker is really good, then yes, then of course the talk would be much more desirable as well. So this again, it is more just a generic, let's say, commentary. Yeah, it may not apply in all occasions, but I just try to give an example of what it meant. Okay. So in this way, many of the conversations between the Buddha and Ānanda are discourses for the instruction of others. Several times, the Buddha created a special occasion for a discourse by smiling when he came to a certain locality. Venerable Ānanda knew that a fully enlightened one does not smile without cause. And he understood immediately that there was a reason for a question. So Venerable Ānanda then asked the awakened one why he had smiled. And thereupon the master gave a detailed explanation of an incident in the past, a Jataka story, which had taken place at that locality. So of course the Buddha is one who has the ability to not only remember his own past lives, but also of others. So sometimes when they visit a certain place and the Buddha comes across someone who, let's say the Buddha with his wisdom eye sees that, okay, this person ready to listen to the Dhamma, and so I will teach that person the Dhamma. And the Buddha is able to see the past lives of that particular person. So that's what it's trying to say. It might relate to a certain past Jataka story. And then usually when that happens, then there is a teaching to follow as well. Something for us to learn as well. So the conversations in which the Venerable Ānanda took the initiative by asking a question are far more numerous than the ones the Buddha initiated. Now, this is a sentence where we should think about. We should think about. So I always reflect on Bhante Vimalaramsi, when he gives retreats, when he gives Dhamma talks, he's always like, okay, questions, come on, ask your questions. So he's always like urging us to ask questions. And it took me a while to understand. And then I think Bhante, maybe at one point, he probably got a little bit frustrated, and he was like, well, if you don't ask enough questions, then your next life you're not going to be reborn very intelligent. And those of you who remember Bhante Vimalaramsi, he used to share stories about how he and his teacher U Silananda, he used to have a lot of conversations, and Bhante Vimalaramsi used to ask questions again and again and again to Venerable U Silananda until he just was so like, why do you have so many questions, I think one of the stories I remember, if I'm not wrong, was Bhante was saying one time maybe Venerable U Silananda got so vexed by, Bhante Vimalaramsi's questions. He was like, you ask so many questions in your, next life, you're gonna be smarter than Einstein, Um, so it kind of took me a while to understand why it is important for a student to ask a teacher question. Until quite recently, I started this experiment, or wouldn't call it, yeah, kind of experiment. So I started asking myself, if asking questions as a student was this important in one's progress in the practice, let's say, then I thought, well, shouldn't I kind of encourage my students in music, in piano, to do the same? Yeah. And this, I'm not sure how it is with school education system around the world, but I've been told it's more or less the same, that students aren't encouraged enough to be curious, to ask a lot of questions in school. In fact, I've had actually one of my students, she's 10 years old, and she even said to me that one of the teachers in school discouraged them from asking questions. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. So when I started to, I think it was about a year ago, maybe less, I can't remember exactly, when I started to change my teaching habit a little bit. So I would, in a sense, force my students to ask me questions. Like literally go to them and say, okay, before we start the lesson, what are your questions? And to a certain extent, I was a little bit borrowing Bhante Vimalaramsi's style a little bit, as in sometimes week after week, no questions, I start to threaten in inverted commas, my students. And then I start to realize why it is so important, because when those students of mine do ask questions, after I keep pushing them, it steers the lesson. It steers the lesson. So in music, it's a little bit different because there is another feedback mechanism. So if they practice or if they don't practice, by demonstrating what they have practiced, that is it's a feedback mechanism to the teacher, then we know, okay, what are the instructions that I need to give next? So in a sense, I find it very similar, because there was once I tried to prepare a lesson plan in advance, and then I realized why my music teachers in the past, I don't think they had set lesson plans for us. It was always more like a flow with the student kind of structure. So it's a very different way of teaching. So in terms of secular education, we need a lesson plan, right? So whether it's in school or in college or university, there is a set syllabus, there is a lesson plan. By the way, we do teach with a set syllabus as well. But it's like, okay, today we're going to do this, week 2 we're going to do this, week 3 we're going to do this, week 4 we're going to do this. And whether the student comes along or not, we only know through assignments that are given, and of course there's an exam, right? However, from memory, how I studied music, it wasn't like that. there isn't a set, there is exams that we need to take. There is that process of preparing for the exam, but the instructions itself depend on where the student is at any one point in time. And so I realized then that if the student doesn't ask questions, unless the teacher has a very good ability, well, the Buddha, of course, is the ultimate example, let's say. But if the student doesn't ask questions, then it's up to the teacher to dig. That means the teacher has to ask questions, or has to, in a sense, probe the student. As in, what do you understand by this? What do you know by that? Because if the teacher doesn't probe, there is no feedback mechanism for the teacher to understand where the student is. So if instructions are given to the student who is not at that level to receive those set of instruction, it is as good as no instructions. I'm not sure if I'm making sense here, but please give me some feedback if I'm not. But so then I realized when I experimented this teaching style in music, that it does make a difference. It does make a difference in terms of guiding the student, and also it in a sense, I'd say, empowers them a little bit. So if they are of the habit to be fed all the time, then it is a push for them to come out of that habit and start to be curious, start to investigate. What am I doing in my practice? And da 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 da. So when the teacher, in a sense, pushes the student to ask questions, to the point where the teacher starts to threaten the student, let's say, if you don't ask questions, then it pushes the student into a mindset of, ooh, I have to start thinking about my practice or how I practice. Because if the student doesn't start thinking, or in this sense, I'm leaning towards the investigating the mind states, which is one of the 7 factors. If the student isn't pushed into that, and the student is used to the condition of not having to ask questions, then it's difficult to have that arise. It's not impossible, it's just not a habit. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? I have no idea if I'm making sense. Okay, maybe let's proceed then. So that was about asking questions and the importance of asking questions in our practice. So for instance, Venerable Ānanda asked whether there was a fragrance which went against the wind, different from that of flowers and blossoms. And the answer was the fragrance of one who has taken the triple refuge and who is virtuous and generous. This is interesting. So probably they were walking, I don't know, yeah. I haven't really, I should have gone into the Anguttara Nikaya to have a quick look. I'm assuming they were taking a walk in a park somewhere. And it was springtime, or when the flowers were blooming and blossoming, and when the wind blows, obviously, there is a certain smell. So it's springtime here now, and we can smell all sorts of things out there, especially when we go out for walks. So even a simple thing like this, Venerable Ānanda has enough curiosity in him to take that instance and ask a question related to the Dhamma. So how, of course, it's out of curiosity, because Venerable Ānanda is asking, well, fragrance flows with the wind, but is there anything that flows in terms of scent or fragrance against the wind, against the norm, against the natural way of or how things work in this world? And so then the Buddha, usually in these kind of questions, of course, if the Buddha answers, it's always related to the practice. Otherwise, sometimes the Buddha just keeps quiet. As we remembered last week, when Hugh Polton gave the talk about harmonious communication, we read together how the Buddha talked about when he would say something. So he would also choose a timing, whether it's beneficial and it's worthy and it's of value, then only he will answer. So another time, Venerable Ānanda asked how one could live happily in the order. So in the order here means in the community of Sangha, the Sangha community, the community of monks and nuns who are ordained. And so the answer was, if one is virtuous oneself, but does not blame others for lack of virtue. Now, this is very important, because even if we're not monks or nuns ordained and living in a monastery, this is not easy to practice. So we, of course, are trying to uphold our 5 precepts every day. Yeah. And I find myself falling into this trap quite often, especially if we uphold our precepts and we consider our precepts to be pillars that we hold dearly in our lives. We can't help but, get a little bit agitated when we see someone telling a lie, even if it's a small fib. We can't help it. It irritates us. But at least it does irritate me, It's like, oh, pressed that red button in my system. But here, what the Buddha is saying is, if we want to live happily with others in a community, whether it's a monastery or just in society, if we are upholding our precepts and we see someone else in the community not doing the same, we don't blame them. We don't say that, oh, so-and-so tells lies all the time, don't trust that person, whatever. We don't do that. Then here it says, if one watches oneself, but not others. If one watches oneself, but not others. So I'm assuming here, I can't be 100% sure, but I'm assuming here what's different here with the one before is that we are careful with how we communicate with ourselves, but also with other people. So I see this as in terms of how to practice harmonious communication with ourselves and others as well. That's how I see it. Okay, I could be wrong. Yeah. If one does not worry about lack of fame, okay, and this can be difficult. So it's not just about lack of fame as in, ooh, I want to be famous. on a very superficial level, because most of us are not famous people. But what we, again, is difficult to practice is not worry about not getting attention. Or in a sense, not being appreciated enough. And this is something that's difficult, especially if those of us, we have a working life and we want to do well. And let's say we have family, we care for our family, and we are human beings, and all human beings want to feel appreciated. Yeah. But what happens then when we start to fall into that trap of I am not being seen? I am not being appreciated enough. What happens then? Again, then we'd fall into the trap of dukkha, because the very source of dukkha is this perception of I am not the one, I am not getting the attention that I want, the respect that I want, the appreciation that I want. So here immediately comes the conflict with the harmonious perception, the first one, or right view, where we take things personal. So we need to remind ourselves, oops, go back to harmonious perspective. It's not personal. Nothing is personal. Okay? All different people, everybody has their own perspective. Each person's perspective is governed by what they have seen, heard, smelled, taste, touch, and think or perceive in their memory of the past from birth until now. And we have absolutely no control of that. So we absolutely cannot control how others perceive us. We can't. There's absolutely no way. The Buddha clearly explained this in the Majjhima Nikaya number 18, the Honey Ball Sutta, where the king came, Dandapani, I think was his name. So I always love that story, because he came and he asked the Buddha the question, if kings or princes or Brahmins or all these people start to argue with each other, and if I remember correctly, what was the question? It was something like, how can we differentiate between who's right and who's wrong, or things like that. And then the Buddha starts to say something like, oh, there's no point. If people start to argue and you want to start to decide who is right and who's wrong, there is no point to that, is what the Buddha is saying. And then the king just like was upset and then walked away. Basically, what the Buddha is trying to say is there is no point in trying to solve that situation, because every single person in that scenario has their own perception. And then the Buddha gave the whole discourse about how the dependent origination arises. Yeah. So what the Buddha is saying is basically it's a waste of time to even go through the exercise. So here, basically, if we worry about our lack of fame, then it's a waste of time. In another sense, okay? Also, we're taking things personally. So then we're breaking our practice on harmonious perspective, okay? So if one can obtain the 4 meditative absorptions without difficulty, so if one can go through the jhanas easily, then one could live happily. And of course, finally, if one becomes an arhat. So that will be the epitome of happiness. So here, the first step on the path to holiness is mentioned as not criticizing or watching others. So here, sorry. So I just want to correct myself here. So actually it just means the first two here just is literally more or less the same thing, that we are not but we're not here to criticize others. We're not here to judge others. That's the word that I was looking for. Judgment. Okay? So we're here, if we criticize, if we continue to criticize, if we continue to judge others, then we cannot live happily. And just to share, many years ago, I had an advice given to me. And the advice was very simple. And take it or leave it. But the advice was this: don't judge others. No matter where we are in our practice, don't judge, because judgment is the hindrance or the obstacle to developing compassion. That was the advice given to me. Take it or leave it. But yeah, that was the advice that was given to me. And I spent a long time contemplating on that advice, what that advice really meant. So took me a while, but not saying I'm completely there, but I'm more careful. I'm more careful when judging or even talking about others. I am more careful now. And in fact, it's also borderline breaking the fourth precept anyway. So we don't want to develop that habitual tendency. Okay, let's keep going. Ānanda asked, what is the purpose and blessing of virtue? What is the purpose of keeping the precepts? And why is it beneficial? And the Buddha answered, to be free of self-reproach and feelings of guilt, and to enjoy a clear conscience. That's logic, yeah? So anyone can tell you that as well. So for Ānanda, it was like, he wants to ask further. And this is a good way of asking questions, not to stop the moment we get an answer, but to ask further, to dig further. And we can see that a lot of times in the suttas before, sometimes the monks, when the Buddha was there, the monks were there, they asked a question, the Buddha answered, but the Buddha's answer was very short, and nobody in the audience asked further. And so the Buddha was like, okay, no further questions. I'll go to my quarters and retire for the day. So we have to be more, really have that investigative nature, that curiosity in mind, and dig deeper. And then we get further. So Ānanda had this quality. So he asked, but what is the purpose and blessing of a clear conscience? So if the Buddha said, okay, we want to keep the precepts because we want to have a clear conscience, then Ānanda asked, then what is the purpose of having a clear conscience? Then the Buddha replied, it brings joy in wholesome thoughts and actions, happiness with the progress made, and gives an incentive for further striving. And this is important because it becomes the fuel to feed our practice further. This is important. And in fact, it's also clearing the hindrances so that we can progress, right? It's the hindrance that is blocking our progress. So when we clear our hindrances, that becomes the fuel for our progress further. And then Ananda asks, and then what is the result from that? So then the Buddha said, one experiences exaltation in one's heart, is drawn towards the good and perfect bliss, and from that results deep calm and insight. So leading more into, this is, in a sense, it's kind of like a discussion of how the samatha vipassana works, so to speak. It goes hand in hand, so like together. So keep the precepts, then the hindrances are at bay. Clear conscience brings joy, happiness, which is part of the 7 factors, further fueling our practice, going towards more deeper peace, into further calm and insight. So another way of thinking about this is, in a sense, also it's a shorter, less technical description of the 7 factors of awakening. It's another way of seeing it. Okay. And in this way, Venerable Ānanda inquired about many aspects of the Dhamma. And we should learn from Venerable Ānanda how he has this curious nature. He has this nature of wanting to learn, and he's a very diligent student, as what we read before in the previous chapters. He's very diligent as a student. He wants to keep learning. He keeps asking questions, and it's brilliant because the more questions he asks, the further answers he gets. He digs deep into the Dhamma with the Buddha's guidance. So this is a very good quality as a student, for a student to have. Sometimes Venerable Ānanda reported certain views of his to the Buddha, so that the Buddha could either accept them or correct them. For instance, one time he approached the Buddha and said, "It seems to me, Lord, that good friendship is half of the holy life." So this is the famous conversation that we heard before about how important it is to have Kalyanamitta in our practice. And unexpectedly, the Buddha disagreed. "Do not speak thus, Ānanda. Noble friendship is more than half the holy life. It is the entire holy life. For what would the holy life be like if they had not at all come to the Buddha as their best friend to be shown the right way?" So this is very important, and we've read this before, and we hear this again and again, that choosing our Kalyanamittas, or who we grow and practice together, is super important. And if we want to think from a layman terms, not necessarily from a spiritual practice perspective, even from a very common lay life perspective, it's the same. So again and again, I have conversations with people who have no knowledge of the Dhamma, perhaps have not had the opportunity to come to Dhamma yet, but it's the same thing when I say to them, I'm now very careful about who I choose to keep close in my small circle of network, and it makes a huge difference in terms of my progress in my life. They agree. And so I've in the past year or two now start to be very careful. I'm not saying, people that I'm not saying that I'm judging people, again, coming to that. But what I'm saying is I choose who to spend my time with, if that makes sense. So for people that I feel, it's not that they're bad people, it's just that it's not very beneficial for me to spend time with them because it doesn't help me in my practice. Either, maybe they are not strong keepers of precepts or whatever it is, yeah? Then I stay away, or spend less time with them, I can still be amiable, but I just don't spend time. And also when we start to be more focused in this way of thinking, it starts to guide our lives. So we start to see, okay, in my life, what is of value? And there can be different degrees. And what is of lesser value? And so I am responsible for how I want to lead my life and who I want to associate with and keep in my close network. And I get to choose that. And when we start to pay more attention to that, then it starts to influence all the decisions that we make in our lives. And every single decision that we make, as we know, becomes the causes and conditions of what comes next. Simple, right? It's almost like a mathematical equation, almost, not quite. You can't put it in a mathematical equation because it's too complex. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. So the best known remark of Venerable Ānanda must surely be the assertion with which he opens the Mahanidana Suttanta, Great Discourse on Causation, Digha Nikaya number 15. Dependent origination, Lord, is very profound, but to me it seems as clear can be. Again, the Buddha disagreed. Not so, Venerable Ānanda, not so. Sorry, he would say to him, not so, Ānanda, not so. He wouldn't call him Venerable Ānanda. He would call him Ānanda. Not so, Ānanda, not so. This dependent origination is profound and appears profound. It is truly very difficult to penetrate because they have not understood and penetrated this one principle. Beings are caught on the wheel of birth and death and cannot find the means to freedom. And then the Buddha explained to Venerable Ānanda dependent origination in its manifold aspects. And once Venerable Ānanda saw an archer perform extraordinary feats. He told the Buddha how much this had impressed him. And coming from the warrior caste, Ānanda must have temperamentally disposed to appreciate such displays of martial skill. So in a sense, because they were both cousins and they both came from the warrior caste, quite likely when they were kids or young, they would have been trained in that skill. So for one who is trained in a certain skill to recognize someone who is extraordinary in that skill, they would be able to do that. Okay, so for example, I know nothing about archery. I would only be able to tell a person's skill if they hit the bullseye or how far they are from the bullseye, right? But I wouldn't be able to know how skillful they are just based on how they hold the bow and arrow and stuff like that, right? But the Buddha and Ānanda probably would be able to judge that, okay? And the Buddha used this statement to draw an analogy. He said it was more difficult to understand and penetrate the Four Noble Truths than to hit and penetrate an arrow with an arrow, a hair split 7 times. So to penetrate with an arrow a hair is already difficult enough, but to even further split it 7 times is yeah, quite incomprehensible. But we shouldn't, the way I see it is we shouldn't see this as, oh my God, it's near impossible for me to any one of us to fully penetrate and understand the Four Noble Truths clearly. I would think of it more in terms of how many times we've been through the samsaric rebirth. So I would think of it more in terms of how long it takes. Not so much in terms of, oh my God, it's going to be near impossible for me to get there, but more in terms of I have been in this, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, countless times and had not come across the Four Noble Truths. So I wouldn't see it as something to feel, what's the word? To be disheartened. Wouldn't see it as that way, okay? Another report says that Ananda once saw the famous Brahmin Janusoni, a disciple of the Buddha, driving along in his glorious white chariot. He heard the people exclaim that the Brahmin's chariot was the most beautiful of all. And Ananda reported this to the Buddha and asked him how one could describe the best chariot according to the Dhamma. And the Buddha explained the vehicle to Nibbana by means of a detailed simile. Faith and wisdom are the draught animals, moral shame, the brake, intellect, the reins, mindfulness, the charioteer, virtue, the accessories, meditation, the axle, energy, the wheels, equanimity, the balance, renunciation, the chassis. The weapons are love, harmlessness, and solitude, and patience is its armor. So imagine that, how the Buddha just uses the simile of a chariot to describe. In here, we can see the 7 factors, we can see the 5 powers, yeah, and a lot of other qualities as well to cultivate. So this is a very nice way to finish this particular chapter of this reading or section. So I'd like to read it again. It's very nice simile. So faith and wisdom are the draught animals, the 2 animals in the front that pushes, or in a sense pulls the chariot. So these draught animals are the ones that are driving that chariot, faith and wisdom. Moral shame, the brake. Moral shame means we have to hold our virtue. We have to keep our precepts. And having the fear of breaking the precept is what's our brakes. It is holding us back. Intellect are the reins. The reins are what the charioteer uses to guide the animals. So we have to use our intelligence, our logic sense to guide our faith, so we don't have blind faith. Mindfulness, the charioteer, the driver, we have to be mindful. How are we going to drive our practice? We have to be mindful in that. Virtue, the accessories, virtue, sila, the accessories, they are what makes up the chariot, what makes us, is the virtue. Meditation, the axle which holds the chariot together. That is the meditation we need to keep this vehicle of our vehicle of practice. We need the meditation to, in a sense, keep the balance or keep it together. Energy, the wheels of the chariot. If we don't have the wheels, the chariot can't move smoothly. Even if you have the draught animals pulling it, it can't really be pulled if you don't have wheels to travel. So we need the energy, like the wheels of the chariot. Equanimity, the balance. So when the animals are being driven together, they have the charioteer holding, guiding the reins, balancing the reins. So equanimity is what keeps the balance. With that balance, then the draught and the animals go together. Renunciation, the chassis. Let's see if I can find the synonym for chassis, because chassis sometimes may be a bit difficult. Let me just quickly, if my laptop will work. Okay, synonym for chassis. Okay, so here from the Oxford language, similar words for chassis: framework, frame, skeleton, shell, casing, structure, bodywork, body, fuselage, hull, anatomy. Okay, so many ways that the word chassis can be used. So in the sense of framework, the structure. So renunciation, not necessarily, becoming a monk or nun, but renunciate from, yeah, you can think of it as renunciating from our worldly desires, let's say, not to be too caught up. And that becomes a framework for our practice, being contented with whatever we have in that sense. And the weapons, so this chariot also has weapons to protect, right? And the weapons are love, harmlessness. Harmlessness, in a sense, is compassion. That means not harming another. And solitude. Solitude also, not necessarily you just live alone and don't mix with others, but solitude means also can be thought of as just a balance of, in a sense, we can think of it as practicing harmonious communication. When we really have good balance in harmonious communication, we, in a sense, become solitude, because we become very mindful and watch how we communicate with ourselves and with others. And when we do that, we don't become a bother. And that is, in a sense, also practicing solitude. We become harmonious with ourselves. We become comfortable living with ourselves and communicating with ourselves all the time, as much as possible. And naturally, then we will be harmoniously communicating with others as well. So it's difficult to achieve that balance, but it can be done with practice. Patience, it's armor. All right. Oh, goodness me. So yes, so we will stop here. And then the next time we will read about Ananda's former lives. Let's stop here. That was probably a little bit too lengthy. of a reading. Sorry, I probably went off tangent a lot. Anyone who want to give any thoughts or questions or comments before we wrap up? Is there anything that didn't make sense?
Thank you, May. That is a very beautiful reading. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Oh, yeah, but bear in mind, thank you, Madam Nanda. Thank you for the feedback. Bear in mind, though, that sometimes I probably give too much commentary from my own perspective based on where I am in the practice. So um, I'm just saying here for the benefit of those who will watch this recording later as well. You know, I'm not a twin guide, so as how the Buddha said, everything that we listen or hear, reflect, investigate, do your own investigation, and see whether it makes sense or not. And sometimes my interpretation could be completely off tangent, for all you know. But yeah, well, I'm glad it was useful anyway. And I'm trying to draw more of the teachings of the Dhamma to see what I can pick and apply to when I teach music to my students. It's a bit tricky because the context is different, but there are ingredients that can be used, and asking questions is one of them. So yeah, I would say if I would summarize today's reading in terms of two major things, key takeaways, I'd say one of them was the importance of asking questions, and there's a lot we can learn from Venerable Ānanda in terms of how he asked questions to the Buddha. And then the second one is just this final verse here, the description how the Buddha explained the vehicle to Nibbana, what he's literally summarized the ingredients of what we need to take us to Nibbana. Okay, so if there's nothing further, then let's share some merit. Tung, tung, tung. See if I can do this. May suffering ones be suffering free and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. Next week we have doo, doo, doo. Brother Milinji, he will come and read Majjhima Nikaya number 26, Ariya Pariyesana Sutta, the Noble Search. And then the week after, we continue the reading with Venerable Ānanda's former lives. Okay? All right. Thank you for dialing in. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.